Hey guys, welcome back to the Max Spence Business Podcast. Today I have a very special episode, but before I jump into that, if you guys like the content I'm putting out, please like, subscribe, leave a review. It helps out a lot with the podcast and also the people that are coming on the show. So without further ado, today's guest is Campbell Barron. He's actually 17 years old, which is crazy. He's an entrepreneur. He has his own business in media. He's also a podcast host of The Ones Who Succeed. And he also runs a show on TikTok, which is 30 to 60 seconds long, talking about business and tech. It's great having you on the show, Campbell.
Yeah, pleasure to do this. I really appreciate your interest, and yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I'm a podcaster myself, and I know you've grown your podcast in the past, I think 2 years and a bit to quite like you've grown it a lot. So I'm really interested in hearing your sort of tips and tricks of how you've sort of done that, how you've sort of got people onto your show. But before we jump into that, why don't we start with an intro about who you are and sort of how did you get into podcasting?
Yeah, so my name is Campbell Barron. I'm 17 and I host a podcast called The Ones Who Succeed, and have interviewed entrepreneurs like Mark Cuban, Chris Sacca, Scott Galloway, the founders of Dollar Shave Club, SoulCycle, Headspace, Gimlet Media, and many others. Look, in the podcast, I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I think you're giving me a little too much credit. It's not a big podcast, and it's still small in the grand scheme of things, where I kind of want to take it. But I have learned a few things during the past couple of years in regards to kind of starting a podcast. I was born in Toronto, but I grew up in New York. I moved my family moved there from 2007 to 2012. So I very much, I have friends in New York. I very much identify with both countries. And I became very interested in entrepreneurship and startups and media when I was, towards the tail end of my time in New York and kind of moving back to Toronto. When I was 13, I started a video agency where I was producing social media videos for brands. And there was this experience that really taught me how to A, send a cold email, and B, kind of like run a little bit of a business, kind of be an entrepreneur. I was interested in media and content creation, but the business side I was also very interested, but kind of had to learn quickly and learn via many mistakes, if you will. I ended up working with brands like Pinkberry and Sleep Country Canada and a bunch of other kind of brands, smaller brands in Toronto, kind of producing content for them, social media content. It really taught me a lot, and I became very interested in kind of it kind of pushed me down this rabbit hole, if you will, of my interest in the intersection of media, tech, and entrepreneurship, which I really still carry to this day. And I think it was that experience that really led me to start a podcast in June of 2018. I believe media is super valuable, but I think it's undervalued. Not necessarily from an ad revenue perspective, but more from like an influence perspective. And we can get into that later, but it's something I very strongly believe, and figure that having a media entity that could be run by me, but at some point maybe run by but owned by kind of whatever I end up doing, that I wouldn't necessarily sell, and it would kind of be like an arm of like my future work would be valuable. And I also thought it would also enable me to kind of be able to meet really interesting people, talk about things I'm very interested in, and if it would work out long term, I figure that it could be a job, it could be a part-time job, it could just be something I could do. And so in June of 2018, I started a podcast. I didn't have a lot of money, I had a little bit of savings, ended up getting a sponsor who kind of funded the first season of the show, and traveled to New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles to interview kind of these entrepreneurs and guests, and launched the show in January of 2019. Launched it kind of with a slow start. Retention was good, but not many people listened. Took a year to really figure out what I was going to do with the pod. Like, am I going to do a season 2? Like, like I spent a lot of time. I got a little bit burnt out, if you will. I spent a lot of time really getting it off the ground, but kind of didn't really know what to do next. Ultimately, quarantine hit. And I figured this was the best time to kind of relaunch season 2 because I didn't have to meet people in person. And Zoom was now socially accepted, both from the guest perspective, but also from the listener perspective. And not like it wasn't socially accepted before, but for me, I really felt like I had to meet people, and quarantine forced me to kind of do it over the internet, which meant I had access to more people. It was like 50 times cheaper. Launched season 2 with an interview I did with Mark Cuban. Then have kind of been posting new episodes every Wednesday. Now I'm kind of going to start to get into the video side of this. I started a TikTok page to promote the podcast, which ultimately, did promote the podcast and, but also kind of promoted my brand. And so, yeah, right now I'm just kind of producing TikTok videos. I'm producing content for the podcast. I, work full time at an education technology startup here in Toronto, and on the content side of things at this startup. Graduated high school a year early to kind of pursue that full time, and I'm just like taking it day by day, and always in exploration mode, and yeah, grateful to be able to chat with entrepreneurs that I very much look up to.
Man, that is incredible. Like you dropped a lot in there, like but we'll jump into that. But yeah, like that, your story is really, really interesting. And I'm really happy that
Thank
you
you.
actually started a podcast to sort of tell your story. Well, also, but interview other people at the same time. But
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So why don't we start with, okay, so you started like a media company when you were 13 years old. Like, how did that sort of happen? Like, were you always from like 6 or 7? Were you always sort of just had this like interest in business or something? Or when did that sort of hit you?
Well, I think I've always been interested in entrepreneurship. Now, always, I don't really know when it hit me. Maybe like 8, when I was in New York. I had a lemonade stand on Broadway. So that's the flex I could say. Just because in New York, everything's in such close proximity that if I was going to start a lemonade stand, I could just kind of move it around. And so I did. It was probably illegal, but the NYPD never gave me a hard time. And ultimately, I think from then on, I was like, it's very hard to tell because I think there are a couple. It's difficult to think back to like how do you know what an entrepreneur is? I think I probably learned the word entrepreneur much later on. But when I was 13, I figured I really I need to have some form of taste of entrepreneurship, like actual, like a formative, something that I could actually try out, versus kind of just, building things on the side, apps, whatever. Like I want to actually like try to start like a business. And to be honest, I think the video agency that I started had my name tied to it. It was much more of like, freelancer, much like, resembled much more of one of a freelancer than a kind of a company. I never really had employees. I had some friends who I would hire part-time to help me shoot, but it was, I don't want to make this seem much bigger than it was, but it was definitely a taste of entrepreneurship, to say the least. And the logic there was like, I've been editing videos for a little bit. And I, really liked the idea of being able to kind of, I was like, should I get a job working at like a Tim Hortons, or should I like try to figure out a way to make money myself? And I think, I think there's actually quite a lot to learn working for someone in a retail position. But for me, I figured like, the number one skill I take away from that experience isn't the money, because I didn't make a ton of money, but I did gain the experience of learning how to send cold emails, which is something that like I basically attribute everything I've done later on to. And so the logic was like, how can I like help brands like target a younger audience? How can I make kind of videos that might not cost as much, but kind of speak to a younger audience, if you will. And I ended up doing that. Like I shot a pillow fight commercial for Sleep Country Canada. That was really fun. Set up a photo booth at a Pinkberry location. It was kind of like experimenting with like, difficult or sorry, not difficult, but different ways of kind of marketing, that, ultimately I look back on and I think of that as a very fond experience.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is like, what did people like? Because you can't see the age behind like an email or a phone call, right? So was it like, did you have any like pushback, or were they just like really excited that like, because you show up and you're like 15 years old or 16 years old, and they're just like they might be like, what, and they might be looking at you like, or like, so like the question I'm trying to get across here is that, let's say somebody who's 15, that might be a fear for them of in their head of saying like, oh, well, I'm not going to email them, or what do I do if I actually like I show up and I'm 15 or 14 or 16 and these people look at me and they're like 30, for a 15, 16-year-old, going to shoot, a commercial or something, or a video for YouTube or something, with a 35-year-old business owner, it might be really, really intimidating. So how did you overcome that with also the cold emails, but also going to those shoots?
Be transparent. I said in the subject I said by a 13-year-old. I actually used my age as a way to get in front of these people. And ultimately, I don't know if that was the best decision. I have a friend who's my age who runs quite a successful agency, and he totally hides his age now. Like he's like, it's not going to help. But at the time, I was really like figuring out like what works, what wouldn't, and I realized like if you're via Zoom and you're, like my friend, he doesn't necessarily meet all his clients in person, you can kind of, you don't necessarily have to be, and you don't necessarily have to think of what you're doing. Like you don't necessarily have to disclose your age. And sometimes I think it really depends on the situation. But you mentioned I'd be showing up to these shoots with my camera gear, etc. Like it would become very clear that I was 13, and that might throw them off. That might, and so I figured just be upfront with it, just be transparent in the email. I'm a 13-year-old, video maker, or, content creator, sounds better. And just like, just do the work. And ultimately, like, I really felt like I didn't necessarily get treated differently because of my age, because if you kind of just do the work, you do the work. And ultimately, I think I actually think a lot of people were kind of like, this is interesting. I probably don't get too many emails from a 13-year-old. Like, I'll just give this kid a shot. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah, 100%. And in their mind, they're probably thinking like, they've probably never got an email from a 13-year-old saying, hey, can I, do this for your business, or can I provide this service to your business, right? So they're probably
Right.
more interested just to meet who you are, right? And have a conversation with you about, your
Totally.
origin and how you sort of like started this business, right? Because they're probably like, what, like 13 years old? This guy's in like middle school or or
Right.
something.
And that's why I mentioned, like, I would say it's much more of like a personal brand exercise than a real company. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people were, they were hiring me, right? Like, I think I called the company Campbell Videos. So it was very much tied to my name.
Yeah. So now jumping to getting your guests on your show, because you've got some pretty high level guests on your show, and I think one thing that might actually help you, I don't know if this does help you or it works against you, is actually like you did say it a bit, was your age. So if you're approaching somebody like a high level CEO and you're saying you're 17, and this is what I've sort of seen is that for my own podcast. Jumping from 19 to 20, when I was 19 starting this podcast, and saying I was 19 years old, people were much more responsive to a younger person, because it's not like, it's more that they want to help you and they want to give back or something. They're more responsive than, let's
Totally.
say you're 20 years old or 25. Then they sort of see you not as a kid, like still maybe as a kid, but not as a kid, and it's a little bit different than like using your age as like, hey, I'm 17, I'm 16, or I'm 15 or something. What has been your experience on what has been your experience, and how did you actually get Mark Cuban and all these other people on your show?
Yeah, totally. I think, like I said, age is like pretty much a good chunk of the reason why. I definitely didn't hide my age, and I figured like that is the reason, that is how I'll be able to get these guests. Because if I just market myself or just or just say like I'm a 15-year-old podcaster, like, how many interview requests do they get from, 50-year-old podcasters? And how many interview requests do they get from 15-year-old podcasters? I basically needed some way to stand out. And ultimately, I ended up getting the guests I could, just because of kind of like a relentless nature. I've always been kind of relentless. I think of it's both positive and negative. And, I just sent like 1,000+ emails to potential guests I wanted to interview. Like, kind of no secret. I didn't know anyone. A lot of people are like, are these your parents' friends? They're not my parents' friends. Like, I don't know. I didn't know anyone in tech before this. My parents didn't either. And so I was just like really trying to figure out a way to get in front of these guests. And what would happen is you get one no, and then it'd be like, it hurt a little bit. But ultimately, once you got your 100th no, it just flies off your back. And I think as I got more guests interested in verbally committing, I was able to use their names to get more guests interested. Mark Cuban, I got him a year after the show's been out. So, and I also interviewed one of his friends, Chris Sacca. So like totally seems like it de-risked it quite a bit, right? because there's a podcast I could point to that like looked legit enough. There were guests that looked legit that I was interviewing. But the hardest people to get were like the first 4 interviews. The first 4 were like super difficult, and then after that, I managed to make it kind of as more people as the guest itself as more prominent guests signed on, if you will, or like verbally committed, or actually interviewed them eventually. More people were kind of it de-risked it, and more people were interested in doing it.
Yeah, and that sort of makes sense, right? When you can name drop somebody being like, "Hey, I've had Mark
Exactly.
Cuban or these other people on," then on their end, they're probably thinking, "Well, Mark Cuban probably took this for a reason. This other person took it for a reason. Like they did it for a reason because these guys are very like these guys and girls are very very busy, right? So there's a reason that they
Totally.
took it. So adding that probably helps. But with that, like I've noticed that you're probably like I looked at my podcast and I looked at your podcast, and your podcast the production is really well done on your podcast, and the people that you've had on are all like at a high level, right? Like they're all like the
So
CEOs,
yeah, a
CEOs.
good amount. I mean, I actually like I'm not as picky as I used to be, because I think there's a value in talking to entrepreneurs who are in it, who haven't had the exit yet. But yeah, like I still do, have prominent entrepreneurs on for sure.
So what have you seen with that, like for growing? Because right now I'm still like I'm 11 months into my podcast right now. You've been at yours for 2 years. You've been able to interview some pretty amazing people, and so I wanted to ask you sort of quality over quantity. Like right now I'm putting out 2 to 3 episodes per week. But I know that I'm probably not getting the same viewer and retention amount that you're doing. I also noticed with your podcast that your podcast production is very well done, and you've also done clips with it at the beginning of your podcast. You also have sponsors as well. So have you? It looks like you focused a lot more on quality than quantity. And what was your reason behind that?
Well, look, I don't want to paint the picture that I have a big podcast. It's actually quite small. I don't disclose the numbers for many reasons. I don't necessarily focus on the numbers, and so I actually don't necessarily think our audiences are as far apart as you might think. Certainly, what I care about is audience retention, and the best way to do that, I think, is just to have a decent production value. But that doesn't really equal anything, because, to be honest, like there are many shows like Joe Rogan where it's kind of just start, stop, record that, get way more listens than my show. So I actually can't comment on how to grow a podcast, because mine hasn't, like, I'm not there yet. I had a deal for season 1 of the show, but ultimately, like, I couldn't support myself on my podcast. I'm not like this big podcaster yet. I think I'll get there. But from a growth perspective, I really can't answer that, just because I feel like that's not I'm not qualified to answer that, because my podcast isn't that big. It's relatively small. But I can say, when it comes to getting prominent guests, and when it comes to production value, the reason I have, or at least I try to have, a high enough production value is because I think I'm just like a video content nerd, and a lot of the stuff I admire does have a high production value. I think that's pretty much it. I don't really think of it strategically. Ultimately, you want people to listen for a long time, and a great way to do that is by adding music, just moving the conversation along. I edit every conversation a lot, so people don't necessarily know that. Like, I try to hide that, but each conversation is maybe like over an hour, and I'll try to bring it down, cut out a lot of phrases. I sometimes move answers around, nothing that would depict the guest in a negative light, but just to make it a little more engaging. So there's a lot of behind the scenes editing. And as for production value, I just really like, I like it. I like the process of creating content. I think media is very interesting. I'm kind of a media nerd. And so, yeah. And so that's kind of my logic. But to be honest, like, most of the podcasts I listen to are like start, stop, record, or not most of them, but like a good amount are start, stop, record. And they're way bigger audiences. So, like, I don't really know. I don't really, I'm not kind of necessarily thinking this from a strategic perspective, more so than it's just like, I really like, the process.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. Because I know for mine's very like In my instance, I really like the interviews. I like talking to people, but I'm not huge in the editing side. I don't enjoy the editing as much as going around. Whereas from what I've got from you is that you really enjoy the, adding the music, adding sort of playing around with
Well,
the.
I mean, I know I was just thinking about that answer. Like, it makes it sound like I like it. I love the end product. I don't love the editing. Like, the first person I will hire when my podcast gets big enough, will be an editor, because I don't like it. Like, I'm not a big fan, but I like the outcome. Like, I like the process. As much as I don't like it, it gets me through. And like listening to it all stitched together, and like the music fading, and like the guests and the pre-interview, whatever. Like, that really, I really appreciate that. So it's kind of the outcome that gets me through the downs, if you will, the lows.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you just really enjoy listening to, like, you've put the hard work into it, listening
Yeah,
to the
I
finished
appreciate it.
product.
I think that's the easiest way to put it.
Oh,
If
okay. Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
That, that, that's very interesting. So, with that, I want to touch more on your podcast. So, and in this podcast, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to gain as much knowledge as I can from you, because I know, like, I was looking at your podcast and your like, I know you're being very humble, but at the same time, you have done quite a bit, for in the past 2 years of what you've put out, and the production and all that sort of stuff, the work you've put behind it. But with that, I want to jump to TikTok now, and how did that
Totally.
come about, and also what are the benefit, like, it is probably right now, is there any pros or cons to it that you've seen, and what are the benefits? I know that right now you're sitting at, I think, 86 or 87,000 followers on TikTok right now. Is that your number one followed platform right now, and what is
Definitely. Totally.
the conversion like to other platforms?
Totally. Yeah. Well, TikTok is by far the followed platform. And to be fair, like, I actually don't consider myself big on TikTok, but I don't release podcast numbers, but like, I am comfortable enough saying, like, I have built like a micro audience on TikTok for sure. My podcast audience is so much smaller. However, arguably, I think it will grow, and that will eventually become more lucrative. But right now, like, brand deals are all led on TikTok. If I was gonna go all in on one and make more money, I'd go all in on TikTok. And so I feel totally comfortable talking about like getting guests on the podcast, but the growth part, like, I'm figuring out. Like, I have a small podcast that I'm just trying to grow, just like you, honestly. And so that's kind of how I look at it. But from the TikTok perspective, I really started TikTok because I really wanted it to promote the podcast, to be honest. Like, I was like, this is a good, I mean, I downloaded it in 2019 of September, or sorry, not September 2019, it was September of 2019. And I was experimenting with it. The first video I made, it was like an office video or something, and it got a couple 100,000 views, and I was just shocked. I was like, this is crazy. This is nuts. I spent all this work on my podcast, and that didn't get a couple 100,000 listens, and like, look at this, like this instant video, like, this is crazy. And so I played around with it, but I really started going all in January. So in January, what I started doing was basically creating information style videos about business, entrepreneurship, tech. It took me a little bit of time to figure out the format that worked, and then I was like, this is a great way. I hit 1,000 followers, and then 10,000 followers, and this is a great way to promote my podcast, and build a community, if you will. And so I really tried to kind of keep doing that. And obviously, I actually think less people listen to my podcast because of TikTok, but ultimately, I think that's not necessarily the point, because right now, TikTok's like a decent size, and the podcast seems to, like, people listen and find out about it through other ways. But a lot of the people did find out about my podcast through TikTok, and so I just kind of honed a style. And I've been like, how do I go about this? Like, I don't want to be a TikToker. That's never my goal. Nothing wrong with TikTokers. It's just not really what I want to do. And so I'm trying to figure out the balance of, like, how do I look at this from a media perspective? How do I look at this from a content perspective? And what can I do? Like, what can I do with the podcast? How can they kind of work together? And so oftentimes I'll, mention both on both platforms and kind of cross promote. The second part of your question was, how have you find it's helped to grow? Or how have you find it's helped to translate on other platforms? To be honest, I don't really know, because I haven't, like, I don't make Instagram content. I post the audio episodes of my show on YouTube, but I don't really think that counts, because I'm not going hard on YouTube. So we'll have to see. That's definitely on the roadmap for sure. But ultimately, the goal with TikTok was, like, how can I just like, how can I, like, this is a great way to experiment. This is a kind of a newer platform. It's, being, like it's growing, and it's skewing older, like more adults are joining it, which is, I think, is great because it makes it more legitimate. It gets advertisers more interested. But like, I'm experimenting. I think I still am experimenting, and I just make videos about things I love, which are, media, entrepreneurship, business, and startups.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I'm actually in the exact same shoes, uh, yeah, as you. Like I'm still like experimenting and seeing what I sort of like with different things, in business and comedy and media and all that sort of stuff. Because there's so much from the world, right?
Totally,
There's so much you can do in the
totally,
world, and it's sort of at the beginning. It's like trying to figure out what do I sort of want to commit, like to growing for like 3, 4, 5, 10 years, decades, however long you want to pursue something before you exit. But
totally.
with that, like growing your TikTok, which I found pretty interesting, has the conversion done well to YouTube, or has it done well to like Instagram, or what have you sort of seen the conversion over? Like where did the majority of your YouTube followers come from?
I don't know. I don't even think I have many YouTube followers. Like I said, I really can't answer that because I haven't gone all in on YouTube. I think if I started, and that is on the roadmap. But if I do go all in on YouTube, then I'd be in a better position to answer that question, because I'd be able to say like, okay, well, I'm making content here that actually I think works for the platform. Here's how many of my TikTok followers are following and are joining, but I'm not really doing that, and so I don't really know, and so I really can't answer that question, because I'm just not there yet.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah. So right now you're just testing different things, right? You're just trying to figure out what
Well,
sort of.
right, yeah, well, no, I mean, to be honest, I think I'm more than like on TikTok. I'm less testing. Like, I think I figured out a format that works well enough. I just haven't been, I haven't been posting content really on YouTube other than my podcast, which is just audio. So I don't really anticipate that to do well, because it's on YouTube and it's just audio. But other than my podcast, I haven't really been posting content on Instagram. I don't post content, and so like I don't really know the conversion. I don't. It's like, so right now, if I was gonna answer your question, I feel like there's almost no conversion, because like people really aren't translating. But I don't think that's fair because I haven't really given it a shot, and so we'll have to see.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, and that's what I uh, I've seen that a bit with TikTok. Is I've had people on my podcast, such as, I don't know if you know her, Call Me Chris. I think she's at 11 million now on TikTok, but she's still on Instagram. She's still at, I think she's like 340,000. So the conversion is still quite like still a big amount. But I
That's a
do think
problem.
that I do think as time goes on, more people are going to convert from TikTok, right? Is the same thing that you saw from
I
like
hope so.
Vine, right? When Vine went from people like the Vine stars of like Logan Paul and Jake Paul, when they jumped from that onto YouTube and they started producing more, on Instagram, started producing more content, grew on there, and then also with YouTube and stuff. But like you were saying, they actually started to produce content that is natural to that sort of platform, right? And that's sort of what you
Yeah.
need to do to grow on each platform, because why would somebody follow you on one platform if you're posting the exact same thing on another platform, right?
Exactly. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm like, not going to post the exact same thing. And when I kind of go at it, I'm going to try to diversify a little bit there. But yeah, like, look, I think ultimately, I don't necessarily think that TikTok is going to die. I think through the Trump administration ban, I think they just quite frankly forgot that they were, talking about banning TikTok. And so I don't know what will happen, but I do know, if there's one thing like I think I know, is that you should never be reliant on one platform. And I think most people would agree with that. And so from my perspective, like, I think what I love about podcasting is that, other than, Spotify trying to eat up the ecosystem, which, I don't actually think is a terrible thing, but generally I find that, it is nice not being reliant on one platform, because, podcast is an RSS feed at the end of the day. And so I like that. I like newsletters because generally you kind of, an email list is kind of something you own. So I'm experimenting with kind of content formats, and on TikTok, I think I've found a format that works well enough. Although I'm not TikTok famous by any means, but enables me to like at least have a little bit of a community. Um, but again, like, totally being reliant on one platform, not something that's good.
Yeah, yeah, and I very much agree with you on that point. Is making sure you are diversified, because if TikTok does die or if Instagram goes tomorrow and stuff, if you're on other platforms, it helps a lot. And like you were saying, is having those email lists is that's what I sort of saw, is that you started a newsletter, right? Is very important. And I sort of saw that a bit when I saw, I think his name's Bryce Hall, interviewed Mark Cuban, because Bryce Hall started a business podcast, right? And Mark Cuban was talking about like his email list and how many email followers he had. And, Bryce Hall is an influencer and stuff. So he said, like, if you approach it in a standpoint of saying, hey, a monthly subscription, which is what Logan Paul has done with the Maverick Club, of starting a subscription, which is literally, which is really interesting. And the point is that it doesn't cost him anything extra to to create more of it or anything, right? It's just like people just keep buying keep subscribing to it, and there's no extra production. Like, let's say with a clothing line or something of that nature, where you have production costs. It's just
it's all digital,
it's digital, so you keep adding to it. So I wanted to jump now to pretty much, you're working at a startup at 17 years old. How did that happen?
Wow, right into it.
Yeah.
Well, I a couple things. When on my first day of high school, I really wasn't a big fan, and so I was like, you know what, I'm going to graduate a year early. I said it. And I think some of my friends were like, why? Like, high school is going to be the best experience of your life. And I'm like, it's not. Trust me. If high school is the best experience of my life, then that's not that I haven't lived my dreams, or, haven't executed on my ambitions, if you will. And so, I think I was a mediocre student. I think I was fine. Never really never really thought too much of it, but just really didn't enjoy it. I mean, I think most people don't necessarily enjoy school, but for me, it was just like, I didn't feel like it was the most efficient way to do things. And it wasn't in a model that innovated a lot. And so I was like, you know what, if I can get through this as fast as possible, then I can kind of spend a year where there's no pressure to go to university or college or whatever it may be. I can work, and work on what? I had no clue. This was even before the podcast. And so, I started doing online courses on the side after school, doing online courses in the summer, just started racking up those credits. And where I live in Ontario, you have to get 30 credits to graduate high school. Usually you'll be on track to do 32. And so I ended up getting all my credits to graduate high school a year early. And this was during quarantine. I graduated in June of 2020. And then, I thought when I would graduate, it'd be this awesome thing. I'd probably take some time off, maybe take a month off, and just figure out what I want to do. Obviously probably do the podcast, but just really think. And in fact, the opposite happened. I just got busier because a month earlier, an angel investor, angel investor that I met in Toronto, funding, a couple of startups here, investing in them. He was starting an education technology startup. He'd actually been working on it since the end of 2019, but it was time to build a content team at this startup. And I met him because I failed to pitch him. I wanted him to invest in something I was working on, and he didn't, but we kept in touch. And so, a year later, he reached out to me and said, hey, what are you up to? We need someone to build this content team. We're working on an education, an app for kids, and we need people to use it. And we also need people to watch videos and engage with it. And so can you do that? And so I said, yeah, of course I could do that. This is how timely, man. This is a month before I graduate high school. I knew something would happen, because that was the other thing. People are going to be like, no, you don't get it. Opportunities don't just present themselves, and you're going to need a degree to get a job. And I was like, no, I got this opportunity right here. And so I obviously said yes. I think honestly, working for someone, is interesting, but especially at a startup where there's things you're doing well and things that aren't going well, and it's high highs and low lows and ups and downs and roller coasters, even for the employees. It's such an interesting experience. And so I've been doing that since May. We've partnered with athletes and chefs and all sorts of creators. Have ended up doing over what have we done? I think we've put together over 150 basically videos, more like 200 videos, all types of courses covering all types of subject matter. And we're pre-launch, but it's very interesting work. And ultimately, I think the experience of just kind of being put into I should be in grade 12, but I managed to do that quickly. And so this is a learning environment that I kind of much prefer, and I think I'm kind of learning quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like that's still incredible. You graduated high school early, and then yeah. So I like the, I'm very amazed with like how fast you've sort of like escalated since you left high school, right? Like you left and now you're
I
just like
appreciate it.
you're. Pardon me.
I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, and now you're at this startup, and people that are maybe listening that are maybe 17 to 20 or maybe in university, they're probably thinking to themselves like, "Damn, this guy's doing this. How can I do that? Or how can I get to where you are? Getting into these startups." And one thing that I've sort of seen is that when like networking is so important. Networking is the
Totally.
key, and I've had so much stuff just come from this podcast because I've networked to different people than saying like I have a degree in this or something like that. It's just meeting people, right? So what would
100%.
you say on that point? Like, do you go to like networking events, or is it just all from just cold emailing people to come onto your podcast, or how have you sort of built your network?
Yeah. Well, one thing I think, like anyone listening who's interested in this kind of work, like I think thinking that you have it figured out is actually really dangerous. So I really don't think I have it all figured out in any way. I actually feel like people will say that, like, "Oh my God, it's so cool that you've interviewed these people at a young age," and I'll be like, "Yeah, I guess," but like I'm just like you. I'm just figuring it out. So ultimately, I think uh, I also think like people do things at all sorts of ages, and so I'm not like I don't necessarily think the younger the better per se. However, I attribute a lot of this to like being able to have a prominent enough network. A lot of it comes from the podcast. Although I was having a conversation with someone about this on another podcast actually, like, is podcasting the best way to network? And I'm not convinced it is, because it's actually a lot of extra work to network. Like, you're kind of recording your conversation, like that'd be a kind of weird way to network. But and also a lot of the people I interview I never talk to again. Most of the people I interview I don't keep in touch with. It's a small group of people who will follow me on Twitter, and I'll send them a DM, say, "Hey, what's up, how's it going, you want to catch up?" And it's really those people that kind of make up your network. I don't think that since you have I'm connected, like I think I'm connected with the founder of Lululemon on LinkedIn. I've never spoke to Chip Wilson before. I really respect what he's built, but like I wouldn't say he's in my network per se. But so like I think there's just because you meet, and I've spoken to a lot of all the people I interview on the show. I've obviously talked to, and I still don't necessarily consider everyone I've interviewed on the show, in my network. Um, but I think the podcast has been great because I really, have been able to build somewhat of a network from the people that I've, built relationships with afterwards. Um, and I when I was 16, in between season 1 and 2 of the podcast, I had this idea for a startup, and I started cold emailing VCs, and every single one rejected me. But we chatted, we had a good conversation, and like we kept in touch, right? And one of those investors I met was now my boss at this startup I work for, right? So I think networking events are great. It's probably hard to do during COVID. I live in Toronto, and there's this event called Tech To, which I went to a couple times, and I think it's fantastic, really well run. But I also think, like, you can also meet a lot of people online, and also networking with people your age is also, I find that super interesting, because the podcast has enabled me to get in front or meet with really inspiring 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds who are like so much more impressive than what I've done, and like that are probably going to be like the next Elon Musks, right? And knowing them, like, I might make a lot of money because I might invest in them one day. You never know. But I think there's kind of networking of people that are above you, or just in their, not above you necessarily, but just have more experience in their career, and you can learn from. But I also think you could learn from people who are your age, and I would say just like send a cold email, DM someone, and it doesn't even have to be a Mark Cuban. It could be you're a local entrepreneur you respect. Hey, can I help you out with something? I get the pick your brain one a lot. I think now with COVID, maybe you're more likely that might work. I've never done that just because, like, I think these people are busy. But if you're like, hey, can I ask you a couple questions? Or, maybe they're launching a product, and you can, help them in a way, give you feedback, sweep the floor. I don't know. Just do something, just provide some form of value. Then it's kind of like then it's more of like a transaction. And and there's more, not necessarily a transaction, because that sounds like, I think there's more of an incentive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, the incentive is being able to go on your podcast, and so that's kind of why that's how I've been able to interview these people. But other people, I think you can just chat with, send them a DM. And also people your age, since they're kind of starting their career, you can meet them you can meet them with way kind of less effort. You can learn, a lot from them. And these are people that might be your future boss, you might hire them one day, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I really like about that is like, can I like pick your brain for 5 to 10 minutes? Is probably not the best approach to use, because it's like,
Yeah,
it's very broad, right? Like when somebody like if this guy is looking, or this girl's looking at
totally.
your message, like they don't know what you want to talk about. Like, what do you want to talk about? This, do you want to talk about? I don't have much time. Like, if you can get really specific on what, like, one thing, and you have a list of questions, they're probably more likely to incline to actually talk to you about it. And also, like you're saying, if you can provide value, let's say you have a skill in editing or shooting videos, or like drawing or something of that nature, or making music or something, if you're able to say, hey, I'll do this for free for you if I can have 20 minutes or 30 minutes of your time to cover this, then that'll work out a lot better. There's 3 questions I have left for you. I just wanted to know, because we just came to pretty much the 45-minute mark. How much
No,
more time do
I'll
you have?
I'll go into one.
You'll go into one? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So one thing I want to talk to you about quick is burnout. So have you experienced that yourself so far? And how did you sort of manage that?
Yeah, one thing to add just quickly before we move to this topic, which is, you mentioned like the pick your brain. Like, you're very right about that. I think you're right, at least. And I also think, having a very specific ask is great. So I get a lot of DMs from kids who watch the TikTok or listen to the podcast and are like, hey, can I learn from you? And I don't really, like, part of me is like, like very humbled and grateful that like someone thinks they could learn from me. But I like, I'm not, the Mark Cuban. I'm still kind of learning, trying to figure it out myself. And so ultimately, like, I don't really see how that can work, really, right? And so, but I get it, but the more specific DMs, like saying like what, like, I don't know. I get DMs from kids who are very interested in kind of learning about, my editing style, or learning about, like, what specifically, or how specifically I would get these guests. That's a question I get a lot. Or like, how would you go about getting a job at a startup, right? Like, I don't necessarily think I'm super qualified to answer all of those yet, because like I've only been doing this for a couple of years, and there are many people who have much more experience than most of those. But I've managed to do a little bit, like show that on a small scale, and so like I think I can answer that, or at least give you some advice, take it for what it's worth. And it's a specific question that has like actionable steps, and that makes it a lot easier to answer. Now, going to your question, which was burnout, totally exists. I had burnout after I launched the first season of the show, and it wasn't like an overnight success. Total burnout there. It took me a year to not get back on my feet, but like get back to kind of what I was doing, which was my pod, stay focused, if you will. It took me a year. And then from that perspective, I was able to kind of figure out a way to kind of, quarantine actually really helped, because, I was able to kind of do Zoom interviews. But yeah, burnouts exist.
So
And,
sorry to interrupt you there. I
yeah,
want to go a little bit deeper on that. So with that, like, why do you think the burnout happened with you? Like,
yeah.
do you think it was
It was because, I worked really hard on the podcast, but I wasn't showing it to anyone. It was just all on my laptop. And then all of a sudden I put it out, and it was just this total sprint. I was just exhausted, and I put it out, and people liked it, and I got emails saying, oh my God, I saw you on TV, because I got some press. And I started listing, this is great. But ultimately, like, people, it wasn't like a Tim Ferriss overnight. And I don't know why I thought it was. Totally, like, probably a wrong thing to think from my perspective. But it was just a lot of work. It was kind of like a content dump, if you will. And then at the end of the day, I was like, oh my God. I kind of climbed up this mountain, and like I look up and I see like that big other big mountain, which is like, how do I get distribution? And ultimately I was like, okay, I just need to figure out what I'm doing here. And so I definitely did experience burnout. And I think it's a lot combination of like, expectations, like ridiculous expectations, and just a lot of work. And also, like, I think I think I probably wasn't like, didn't have probably the best lifestyle when I was getting the podcast up and running. I was probably working a little too much, but also like not necessarily taking care of myself. And I was still in school too. So there's like a bunch of things going on.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very understandable, right? Like, I've experienced it myself, transitioning from different things in life, and I think like everybody gets it. It's just a natural thing, right? And I think it comes from, like you were saying, it comes from your perspective of how you approach things, right? And it's like if you're expecting something and it doesn't happen, that can actually like it sort of brings you down a bit. Makes you a little bit depressed. It makes you, like a little bit tired and other things, and you're like, well, what happened? What did
Totally.
I do wrong? You start questioning everything.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
tired. I would say tired. And also like, this evening, last night, I might, have like, think like, am I really doing this right? Like, I'm here, but I want to be there. And ultimately, I think you kind of just have to take a deep breath and say like, wow, 15-year-old me would be like pretty impressed with where I am today. And, I'm sure hopefully 50-year-old me will be, will be impressed with kind of, or hopefully 15-year-old or 17-year-old me now will be impressed with what I'll be doing in 20 years. And you kind of, and no matter, and whatever that is for you, I think like just appreciate the moments, because I really did not appreciate the moments when I was working on the Ones Who Succeed in that first season. And I was so heads down focused on this one goal that when that goal gets pushed back a little bit, it kind of just like set the whole domino effect.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. Is just to enjoy it. And my perspective in life is there's nothing worse to put all this effort and all this stuff and then get to the top and be like I don't know, just hate it and stuff and just be
Yeah,
like
totally.
be upset. I would rather be happy all the way through and then happy when I get there if I don't get there. It's just being
Totally.
happy. And I think that like that sort of my perspective changed from watching Gary V on
Yeah, I love
seeing
Gary
him and
Vee.
him talking about it and stuff really
Hmm.
helped. But to talk now about time management, how do you manage your time to be effective and stuff? And also,
Well, I really shouldn't answer this question, man. I'm so bad at time management. I think, and I think this is actually more common than you think with actually accomplished people. I think maybe. I'm not. By the way, not saying I'm in that bucket, but I just think I actually think part of the reason I'm not in that bucket is because of this. But I don't do a great job managing my time. I get the work done ultimately, right? Or I would have like, the podcast would never, no episodes wouldn't come out, and like no new episodes would come out, and I would lose my job, etc. But right now, like there's like not a consistent schedule. And so if you have any tips, if anyone has any tips, DM me because I'm totally open to this. I don't think I have all the answers at all. And especially when it comes to time management, like, I try to have a little bit of a morning routine, but like, I'll like skip through my alarm. Like I'm not like super great at this and I really should be. But I generally, to stay organized, the one thing I can say do is I write a to-do list every day, just a Notion document, just like what I want to get done. And I can click on it right now and see that I have, like 25 things. And so that might be a bad strategy because I never get through everything, but just like overall kind of a roadmap, that helps. But I am time management's not something I excel with. I wouldn't say I'm terrible at it, but I don't necessarily excel with it. And so I'm really kind of trying to learn. I watch a lot of like morning routine videos on YouTube, like trying to figure this out.
Yeah, no, the funny thing is I'm the exact same, right? It's like, I'm trying to figure out how to be time management and all that sort of stuff. And one thing that I've sort of learned, about like, like those internal conversations you have with yourself is that like, I think like, this is my sort of thesis on it is that, like put less to do in your day and then get it done because it feels better when you put 3 or 2 things and you get them done. You feel so much better
Totally.
than putting 25 or in my instance I would do
That's
the
good
exact same.
advice.
I would put 50 things or 20 things and I have like this huge list. I don't get it done and there's no sense of accomplishment. It just feels like it's just a run on of failing, right? And that can
Yep.
actually affect
Oh
like
yeah.
subconsciously your sort of mind
That
instead
hits
of being
that
like,
hits home.
pardon me.
That hits home
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. That's good advice. That
Yeah,
is
and
true.
well,
I should
that's
shorten that
literally
up.
that's literally what I've experienced, man. Is like, I'll put like ton of things to do, and pretty much I don't get them done, and then I get depressed because I didn't get them done. If I put 3 things and I'm done, there's like a clear. It's like sort of like work. You have a clear clock in. You say you have a clear like clock in time. You have a clear ending time. right? And once you're done, right? And it's not super crazy. And it's just, you build it over time. And like that's what I'm trying to do right now, is I'm trying not to put a lot of pressure on myself to freaking, try and do 1,000 things at once. It's just, try and get a few things done consistently. But now I want to touch on pretty much ideas for your startup. Like I know that you have an interest in starting your own business. What are some things that,
Totally.
like, what is it in tech? Is it in media or something else? Like what are some ideas you're having right now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always have ideas, right? And I think I should say this for anyone listening who's had tried ideas. I've tried 15, maybe 15 ideas, like actual 15 products I've built. Not one has worked, yet I still love it. And so now I haven't started 15 companies because I didn't really go all in on them. They're like side projects, but I think I really like, I guess the question is like, I don't have specific ideas that I can say right now, but like the general question is like, what industries, what waves and trends excite me in tech that like I would be interested in? And this might change, right? But for right now, I'm very interested in voice and audio. I think audio is so interesting. I'm really interested in newsletters. Um, Morning Brew got acquired by Business Insider like in October, which is a very big newsletter for like business. Like it's like millennials, like a New York Times kind of, or Wall Street Journal for millennials type things newsletter. And they like, it actually got acquired. They made a decent amount of money. I think it was like something like 70 million. And I think that's very interesting because like, you hear the world, you hear, in media, the sky is falling, and yet you see a company like Morning Brew, which is doing like probably one of the oldest tricks in the book, which is like, media, or just like, content, straight up content, and, they have podcasts too, but like in a newsletter form, and they did really well. And I find that very interesting. So I love media. I would be super grateful if there was an opportunity where I could create something in media that was lucrative. And so, always looking on that. I love audio, like I love voice. I love testing like voice apps like Clubhouse and like Shuffle, which is a cool podcasting app. And so, I'm doing my just kind of experimenting here in exploration mode, if you will. And yeah, I'm also very interested in consumer social, but I think, social products, I think they're actually like so difficult from just some of the people I've talked to who have worked on social products. They're like probably one of the hardest things you could do, and not always like kind of like an Uber or kind of like a Facebook or nothing type thing. And generally harder to make money. So I like SaaS. Like I don't really have one thing that I'm interested in per se. But this is a question. To be honest, this is a question that I ask almost all entrepreneurs on my program. Like, what waves and trends excite you? If you were going to start a company today, what would that company be? I love voice. I said that, but like Alexa and Google Home and all of those kind of smart speakers, I think that's very interesting. So like there are a ton of different industries that I'm interested in. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, I know we're coming to the end here, but that's incredible. And I know that you're probably, no matter what sort of avenue you choose, I think you're going to do something pretty amazing and awesome in the tech or business sector. I'm excited to watch your podcast grow, man. And yeah, where can people find out more about you, more about your podcast, more about your personal brand?
CampbellBaron.com. Depending on when you're listening to this. Could be a Squarespace site or a link tree or something. Just campbellbaron.com. My podcast is The Ones Who Succeed, but that also has my podcast link. And my newsletter, sign up for that. That's going to be cool. I'm experimenting with an audio newsletter. So like instead of reading it, you get an inbox and it's like a voice memo. Just trying out a bunch of cool things, different things that you could do. Yeah, and you can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm at Campbell J. Baron. But campbellbaron.com kind of has all of that there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Campbell, for coming on the show. It was amazing talking with you.
Great. You asked great questions. I really appreciate you thinking of me, and yeah, had a lot of fun.